So, I've done a few videos already talking about Deb and Chris Stearns and their potential involvement after Stearns did what he did to Maddie. Now, I will put the link for those various videos below so that if you haven't seen them, you can go and check them out. But in a nutshell, there's a lot of inconsistencies in statements made by both Deb and Chris, and it appears that they may have provided Stearns with some assistance after Maddie went missing and prior to him being charged for CSAM materials. I would imagine that if they did have some involvement in terms of helping him out in that period of time, that would have been as a result of him telling them some sort of half-baked lie that didn't really align with the actual facts, so that they believed that he was in some sort of trouble, but weren't fully aware of the extent of the trouble that he was in. Because I would like to think that not all parents are like Roberta Laundrie and are going to cover up for their child who has unalived someone. Of course, we are talking Northport, so who knows? So in this video, there'll probably be things that I state without coming forward and showing you all the solid evidence, because I've already shown that in other videos. So like I said, if you are curious about this and you want to find out more, then definitely go check out my other videos that I've done on this particular topic. Also, in terms of statement analysis, I've done plenty of statement analysis on what they've said, so I won't be doing quite as much of that in this instance as well. My goal for this video is to look at the progression of their so-called assistance with detectives. The progression of the story that's being given, the facts that are being given, and how they have gradually changed it along the way. I personally believe that they were fully aware that Stephan had gone down to Northport that particular night. I believe that they know that he was in the house and assisted him to get into the house, and that basically they latched onto the notion of the storage unit because they knew that nothing would be found there. And it was a convenient diversion from Stephan having entered the house. Now, I've shown a lot of reasons why I believe that they know that Stephan entered the house, and a lot of reasons why I believe they assisted him to enter the house. I will probably touch on them in this video, but this video is coming from that perspective. Now, the timeline that I will give at the start of this video is based on documents from this case, based on CCTV footage, interviews, and information from the FBI. So the main thing that we need to keep in mind here is that it is clearly proven that Stephan did not go to the storage unit at any point in time. It is also clearly proven that he was logged on to his Google account at his parents' house for quite some time that particular morning. And then following being logged on from his Google account, he was still present at that house for something like half an hour to 45 minutes. And I'll show that on the timeline when I get to it. So the facts are this. He did not go to the storage unit. He did go to his parents' house. The hard drive for his computer at his parents' drive was in his computer when he left to go visit Jen and Maddie. When Chris handed that computer over to detectives, there was no hard drive in it, meaning the only possibilities for the removal of that hard drive were Stephan entering the house that morning and removing it himself, or Chris or Deb removing the hard drives themselves. Maybe they're more complicit than we think, but it makes sense to me that somewhat lengthy period of time after he had attempted to log on to his Google accounts at the house, that Stephan probably believed that the best option was to remove and destroy the hard drive. So I believe that period of time that he was still at the house, not logged on to Google, was actually him removing the hard drive. What he did to it, we'll probably never know. So with that said, let's just jump in and have a look at how Chris and Deb's story changed over time. Okay, so just going through some of the parts of the timeline. Now you'll see there's a few bits that I need to update because I haven't added in the information that we got from the hotel room keys, basically. So at the top there where it says 151 to question mark, we know they spent about 10 minutes together. But that's not relevant for this video, so we don't have to worry about that. Underneath that, though, is relevant. At 4:35 in the morning, you have Stephan being captured on camera leaving the hotel room. So on the hotel lobby camera. Not leaving the hotel room, leaving the hotel. And then at 6:29, so he made really good time. He did it in less than 2 hours. Got down to Northport because obviously that time of day there's going to be no traffic. At 6:29, Jen's Nissan is captured on camera 1 mile from the Stearns' home in Northport. 5 minutes later, Stephan logs into Google at the Stearns' home and is logged on to Google for just over half an hour. We know this from the FBI, so we know this is accurate. And then going down a little bit, we have the Nissan leaving Northport at 7:46. If we can take 5 minutes away, because we know that when it was first caught on camera, there's a 5 minute difference between it being caught on camera and him being at the house. So if we say take 5 minutes from 7:46, he left the house at 7:41, which means there's a half hour that's unaccounted for there, which I believe is the half hour when he removed the hard drive from the computer. He's logged on to Google, he's not been able to get in and delete his images, so he's gone for plan B and removed the hard drive. Now, then we have the belief by Northport PD that he had been at the storage unit between 9:08 and 9:16. We know that didn't happen. He did not go to the storage unit at all. And we know that for several reasons. First of all, we have the data. So there's no data showing that the code was actually used. It was a mistake. The code was last used 2 weeks before Stephan made that trip. On top of that, you have Stephan returning at 10:21 to Kissimmee. there's no way in morning traffic that he could have made a 3-hour drive in just over an hour. Not possible. But the other thing is, if you look at where the Nissan was caught on camera, yeah, there's also camera footage from a motor vehicle accident in the vicinity, which meant that they also caught the car on that camera footage down at Northport. And that's how they twigged to him being down there. That's how they caught him, because the license plate flagged up. But then checking other footage showed a corner on, I think it was corner of Toledo Drive. So a business there, they got CCTV footage showing him on camera at 6:29 and 7:46. How does that prove that he didn't go to the storage unit? Because to get from his parents' house to the storage unit, he would have had to have gone past that camera again. Had he gone past that camera to go to the storage unit, then they would have 3 events of him going past that camera, not 2. So basically there would be one where he came to Northport and probably went to the house, then one when he goes to the storage unit, and then one when he leaves Northport again. But there's only 2. So we know utterly for certain that there's no way known that he went to that storage unit. Now, the one other thing from the timeline that we need to be aware of is, because it's not given correctly in any of these interviews, at 10:50 Chris Stearns returns to the hotel. So he's caught on the lobby camera returning to the hotel. He had left the hotel at around 7:30, supposedly to go to his office. At 10:55, so only 5 minutes later, Stephan is caught on camera entering the hotel lobby. So they only returned within 5 minutes of each other. And yet this is something that Chris basically is untruthful about. So let's jump in and start looking at these interviews that were done with Chris and Deb in chronological order, now that we've got this timeline here to remember. And I'll explain along the way why I think this is a bit of a red flag.
Were you aware that, did your son come visit you on Monday morning?
This Monday?
Yeah.
No, he left Sunday.
Okay.
He left Sunday.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So, what time did you get here last night?
3 a.m.
3 a.m. When you got here, where did you meet your son and Jennifer?
We apparently pulled up at the same time at the hotel.
Perfect. Okay. When you guys got there, what did you guys end up doing?
We checked into the rooms. They had 239. I had 203. Opposite ends of the building. I brought my stuff up, went over and said goodnight, and then hit the sack.
After you guys went to your separate ways, when's the next time you talked to Stephan?
I got up at 6:30, 3 hours sleep, and went to the office because I figured he would be sleeping in, crashed and burned, and didn't speak to Jen until 10:45-ish, and she called and asked if Stephan was with me, and I said no. Why? Well, he's not here. Oh, we'll go down to the lobby and see if he's down there. How long has he been gone? 25 minutes. Okay. I said, go check the lobby. And then I started to think about it, called her back, and I said, do you have the keys? No, I don't have the keys.
So the question that was given to Chris here was, when was the next time that you spoke to Stephan after saying goodnight to them? And he goes into a really, really long story where he's talking about getting up early, going to the office at 7:30, And then Jen called him at 10:45, and she hadn't seen Stephan in 25 minutes. And he had this wonderful idea that Jen should probably check and see if her keys were there after she checked the lobby and Stearns wasn't there. So instead of just saying, quite briefly, well, I didn't see him again till 11 o'clock the next morning. And he had gotten up and gone somewhere, but I don't know where he went. He has to have this really long-winded story. But not only that, this long-winded story is making sure that it's placing him and Jen separate from Stephan. Maybe it's just because that's the way it was. But he is doing a lot of explaining for a simple question of when was the next time you talked to Stephan?
So then she said, well, they just called and they're going to be out here within the hour. I said, oh, shit. So I drove out there. So it's probably out to the hotel because I was at my office.
Oh, okay.
Over off of Westwood. And I just grabbed my stuff and said, I'm going to go out there in case you guys showed up. I wanted to be there. So he hadn't showed up by the time I got there, and about 30 minutes later, he finally showed up, and I read him the fucking riot act.
Did he tell you where he was?
Well, he had an energy drink in his hand. He said he got lost. And, the back roads. Hell, I got lost, and I had a QPS. And I said, no, this isn't the right exit. I had to do the return.
So he finally gets to the point. He had gotten back to the hotel, and apparently Stephan got back half an hour after him and said that he'd gotten lost. And here's the thing. We know that they actually arrived within 5 minutes of each other. So it seems hard to mistake 5 minutes for half an hour. Is it possible? Maybe. But not probable. And he talks about reading Stephan the riot act, but he also then talks about Stephan having an energy drink and getting lost, and he's like, well, heck, I got lost. So he's, at that point in time, excusing Stephan. And what Chris does quite often, I've noticed in his interviews, is that he doesn't present something as outright fact. He presents something to the listener in a way that they are expected to take it as outright fact. So here, the implication from Chris is that Stephan's just been out buying an energy drink, and he's rocked up half an hour after Chris got back, and that he got lost, and that it's easy to get lost because, well, Chris got lost too. So here, what Chris is saying is trying to convince the officers that Stephan just went out for a quick drive, got himself lost, got back. But he hasn't said it outright. He just gives these little tidbits that you are expected to put together to form a picture. And this happens a few times with Chris.
Did he tell you he was in Northport today? I'm assuming he did it based on your reaction. So, do you need to take a seat? Or?
No,
okay.
He was in Northport.
Yes. What's the exit you take to get off at your house?
I'm going to 179.
Okay. Do you know the street?
Toledo Bridge.
Okay. So we have more than enough reason to believe that Stephan was in Northport today at the exit that you take to get to your house.
So it's worth noting here that Chris, who usually has a heck of a lot to say, has absolutely nothing to say when they present the fact to him that Stephan was at their house that morning. Or at Northport, at least, that morning. He doesn't say, when they ask him, did you know that Stephan was down there? He doesn't say no. And even when they say that he was down there, you don't get any long response from Chris, like you normally do with a lot of the things that, well, with pretty much everything else? Is it just because he's in shock? Or is it because he knew Stephan was going down there and he hasn't got an answer that would be satisfactory because he doesn't want to tip his hand? Or is he in shock because he knew Stephan was going down there and he didn't think that Stephan would be caught on camera? Because by the sounds of it, there was only that one camera location that they actually caught the car. Now, there's probably going to be, if they went back and looked at various CCTV footage and highway footage, there's probably more footage of the car that they got. But at the end of the day, had there not been that motor vehicle accident near their house where Stephan was caught on, I think, dash camera, it's possible that they may not have realised that Stephan had gone down there at all. So it is possible, if Chris knew that Stephan was going down there, that he is somewhat taken aback because he thought that it wasn't going to be picked up. He does, however, talk about Stephan being super, super tired the night before, so maybe he just doesn't think it's possible for Stephan to have made a 6-hour round trip when he was so exhausted.
Our concern is we're conducting a missing person investigation.
Yes.
Given the proximity of that exit to your home, what we're trying to find out is if she's just hanging out in your house, you just wanted to get her somewhere safe, we want to put eyes on her, make sure she's okay.
She's not at our house because my wife... Well, here's something strange.
Is anybody at your house now?
Yes. Hang on a second. We raise standard poodles.
Say it again.
We raise standard poodles.
Oh, okay.
Except they went on full fucking alert.
House,
Yes.
throughout this period of time.
At what time you think
That's
that
what
was?
I'm
Okay.
What time did the dogs go full alert last night?
7.
I'll grab your water.
Okay. Thanks. 319.
3:19 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you guys have like ring cameras, any kind of security cameras on the property?
So we locked the door, and the door has a keypad, but when I left last night, it wasn't flashing. And that keypad, the battery's been in that thing for 4 years. So I called last night and I said, hey, that keypad doesn't seem to be working. It's not working right. So if you go out the garage, or you need to come back into the garage with the remote control. But she said the dogs went full alert at 3:19. We were at the hotel at 3 o'clock, so there's no way he could have been in Northport. There's a storage unit, but he wouldn't have access to the keys to the storage unit because I have the only key to it. And that would have been locked in my car, and he would have had to come in my room, which he didn't have a key to get into.
So something quite significant that I actually hadn't picked up on before. Chris was the one who introduced the storage unit into the whole situation. So they have said to him, we think your son was down at Northport and we've caught him on camera near your house, only a mile from your house, less than a mile from your house. And straight away, Chris is in damage control mode. She's not at our house, and he said that so very quickly. He doesn't want them going to his house. He doesn't want them focusing on his house. And then we get the various stories that are intended to convince these detectives that there's no way Stephan could have been at the house. He talks about the poodles going on alert at 3:19. And originally when he says this, obviously the listener is meant to infer from that if someone had been at the house, the poodles go on alert. 3:19 wouldn't match the timeline in terms of Stephan going down to the house. And Chris knows that, and he knows the detectives know that. So by introducing that the dogs went on alert at 3:19, he's essentially saying, well, the dogs went on alert at this time, this wouldn't match with the timing, so Stephan didn't go to the house. And then he introduces the keypad that doesn't work. Conveniently, as he was leaving the house, he discovered that the keypad for the front door wasn't working. And so now there's no way of actually checking to see if anyone had entered or exited the house during those early hours of the morning, because you can't check on the keypad. But not only that, that supposedly increases the security of the house, because he would not have been able to enter the house using the keypad. That is what detectives are meant to get from listening to that. They are meant to believe that, well, okay, Stephan didn't go to the house because otherwise the dogs would have alerted much later than 3:19 in the morning. They would have alerted to him going to the house. He also didn't go to the house because he couldn't possibly get in because the keypad's broken. And then he doubles down on the dogs just to make sure that detectives understand what he's saying. So he goes back to the dogs alerting at 3:19 and points out for them, just in case they hadn't made the connection themselves, that that's not possible that it was Stephan, because we were still at the hotel then. Which fits with what Chris is saying when he claims that he arrived at the hotel at 3 a.m, which is what he originally is saying in his narrative. So his original narrative before things progress has him arriving at the hotel at 3 a.m, the dogs alerting at 3:19. He had spoken with Jen and Stephan on arrival at the hotel. Ergo, it wasn't Stephan that the dogs were alerting to. Ergo, Stephan didn't go to Northport or didn't go to the house. And then, having worked quite hard to establish that there's no way Stephan could have gone to the house, what does he do? He introduces the storage unit. And this is where the confusion begins, because it does actually end up directing the investigation towards the storage unit and away from the house.
Yeah, right there.
And that's the only key you
That's the
have
only
to
key.
the storage unit?
Yeah. There's supposed to be two keys, but I haven't seen that key.
Is his name on the storage unit at all?
No, it's mine.
Like he can't show up and say, hey, I lost my key, can you give me access to...
In theory, right?
What time did you catch him on the camera down there?
He knows exactly what it is. He's on the phone, so I don't want to misspeak. But it was clearly when you were unaware that he was down there.
Now, bear in mind, this guy has made a career out of sales. He was a travelling salesman for God knows how many years, and then went into real estate. He also managed to carry on a relationship behind his wife's back for 15 years without her finding out. He knows how to talk the talk, and he knows how to manipulate people to believe what he wants them to believe. So, having introduced the storage unit, the question then is, of course, does your son have access to the storage unit? And Chris doesn't go with, yeah, sure, he's got access. No. He starts with, I have the only key. So you think he's starting to deny that there's any way of Stephan accessing the storage unit. But then he introduces the notion that there were two keys, but I haven't seen the other key in a really long time. So, first of all, yeah, I've got the only key, and, well, it's in the console of my car, but Stephan can't get to it because he would have had to have come into my hotel room to get my car keys to retrieve the key from the console of my car. But, you know what? There used to be two keys. So he's trying to give the impression that he doesn't believe Stephan would have gone to the storage unit, while at the same time opening up the notion that actually it is highly likely that Stephan accessed the storage unit because of this extra key that is apparently missing. And he keeps going back to talking about this extra key. He wants detectives to understand that while he hasn't given Stephan his own key to the storage unit, and he still has his key to the storage unit, and there's no way that Stephan could have got his key to the storage unit off him, it's possible that Stephan's actually got a key anyway. So he's being quite skillful here. He is removing himself from any involvement. He's trying to give the impression that he doesn't believe that Stephan could access the storage unit, while at the same time basically leading the detectives to the belief that actually Stephan almost certainly could have gotten into the storage unit. And then he starts digging for a bit of information. What time did you catch him on camera? This is the first time he's questioned that Stephan, anything to do with Stephan going down to Northport. He hasn't questioned, are you sure it was him? Or are you sure that it isn't footage from when he left on Sunday night? No, he's certain that it was him. He just wants to know what time they actually caught him. If you're trying to cover for someone, that's probably important to be aware of the time frame. Is he covering for Stephan? Well, only Chris can tell us that. But as we go through the various interviews, the way his story subtly changes, it's not something that is changed really drastically with, you know, an about face because there's a brick wall there and the story doesn't work. It's quite subtle and it's quite skillful. Nothing at all like Stephan, nothing at all like Jen, but it's there. And I will explain it as we go along.
They're coming there to see if she's hiding in the house?
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is, given that he went down there, we'd like to make sure like he didn't stash her in the bedroom and hey, just hang out here. You know.
No, she's been sorting out his bedroom because he lives like a fucking pig.
So again, they bring their attention back to the house, and unlike the storage unit where he leaves the possibility open of Stephan accessing the storage unit, when they suggest that they want to check Stephan's room in case he's hidden her in there, Chris offers the definitive answer, she's definitely not in there because my wife is sorting out his room. Now, how fascinating is that, given that all accounts that we have from Deb is that she didn't go into his room. She never tidied his room. She never accessed his room. And at one point in one of the interviews, they talk about being able to re-access his room after he was arrested, meaning that they didn't make a habit of going into his room. And yet, coincidentally, just when Stephan is in trouble and Northport Police actually want to go in and have a look at their house, he's essentially saying here, there's nothing to see here at the house. He couldn't have possibly gotten into the house. And Maddie's certainly not in his room because my wife's in there right now sorting his room. So there is a person in that room. So no, she's not shut in there. See what he's doing? He is not saying, I'm not giving you permission to come and search my house. But he is giving them reasons why it would be a waste of their time to search his house. On the flip side, he's giving the impression that he doesn't believe Stephan could possibly get to the storage unit, but he has introduced the storage unit himself, and he's also introduced the notion of the missing key. So he's definitely trying to steer them towards the storage unit.
And you said you guys have a Ring camera, right?
Well, I was about to tell you that. I switched. Hey, Northport Police is going to stop by to do a wellness check type of thing. They're going to see if somehow house.
Right around the house yelling her name. And just, that motherfucker, you know what? You know what stopped him from getting in the house? He didn't have a garage door opener. The front door lock is not working well.
Yep.
And I had put the lock on the slider.
Okay.
He couldn't get in.
All right. So I'm with the detectives, and they're sending Northport Police over to do a check to make sure that she isn't there. Okay. So you may want to alert the dogs. They're really
lock them up.
friendly.
I've got their food. I'm fixing to feed them.
Okay.
Just tell them it'll get noisy, okay?
Okay.
So I've mentioned before that I just don't buy it with this emotional thing from Deb. And, you know, what it comes down to is Stephan lived there with them. So why the need to suddenly become teary and emotional and supposedly angry over the possibility that someone who lived with you may have actually come in the house? Now, I'm not going to go too much into that because I have covered that in another video. But one thing I didn't mention in the other video is the discrepancy between the words and the emotions. The things that she is saying, the words themselves indicate anger. She even called him a mother effer or something like that. But the emotion she's showing is frustration or being upset. She should be yelling. Based on the words, she should be yelling. But instead, she's got this funny emotional thing going on. She's sniffing like she's crying. She's sounding like someone who is crying. But it doesn't gel with me. But here's the thing. She's also pushing the there's no way he could have gotten into the house story. Which also makes me question, why the emotion? If you're so confident that he couldn't have got into the house, and he's your son, so why would you be so emotional over it anyway? Why the emotion? But she's saying he doesn't have a garage door opener. And the front door wasn't working properly, and she put the lock on the slider. So what she's saying there is, well, I'm super upset about the possibility of him coming into the house, but let me assure you at the same time that there's actually absolutely no possibility whatsoever that he could have gotten into the house because of these factors. Now, in terms of the garage door opener, yes, he may have had his own garage door opener, but when you look at their house on Google Images, Google Maps, the Lincoln was parked out the front of the driveway. So I am imagining that Deb and Chris's cars, if any cars, were parked in the garage, and that there wouldn't have been a clicker in the Lincoln. But some people don't necessarily use their garages that much, but they still enter their houses via the garage. So it's possible that he could have had a front door clicker. We're only getting their word on that, basically. And I will just mention what I've mentioned in past videos. The house would have had a back door. Chris claims it was a gated backyard. But what he means by that was that there were gates either side of the house. Gates which to me look like they would have been easily opened, don't look like they would have been locked. And we've also heard that he probably wasn't so much then, but Stephan was supposedly fairly agile. He could have gotten over those gates. He wasn't short. And of course, on the side of the house where there's no house, it's all just trees. Who's to say that it wouldn't be possible just to climb up a tree and jump over the fence? Once you're over the fence, then you can probably easily open the gate from the inside. So there is never mention of the back door of the house. But the thing that's being pushed here is that it is impossible for him to have entered the house. Detectives must believe this. There's no way Stephan could possibly enter the house. He doesn't have a garage door opener. The thing on the front door wasn't working properly. And Deb had put the latch across on the front door. We have to accept that there's only 2 entrances to the house. Couldn't possibly have been a window open or a possibility of him entering through the back door. They carefully avoid looking at those scenarios.
So going back to the cameras, you were going to say something.
Okay, so I ditched Comcast, and I had the Sky Bell hooked up to Comcast.
Okay.
And I realized when I kept seeing this orange light, I said, shit, I got to move this over. It's a pain in the ass. Move it over to the Frontier Communications versus Comcast. So I've got to reconnect it with the internet.
So the cameras weren't working for the last week?
No, because we discontinued the service. Matter of fact, the modem's sitting on my office floor.
It's funny how Chris talks about Stephan being deceptive, and Chris talks about, I don't believe in coincidences. And yet, coincidentally, the keypad on the front door wasn't working, and the modem for their Sky Bell just happened to be sitting on the floor in Chris's office. But we have to ignore those things because apparently there's no way Stephan could get into the house anyway. So don't worry, there's nothing you can check to see if he entered the house because we've made sure of that. But just take our word at it that there's no way possible that he could have entered our house. Very, very convenient. And don't forget, we now know Stephan did not go to the storage unit. Stephan went to the house. Stephan entered the house. Because unless Chris removed the hard drive from Stephan's computer and destroyed it himself, then Stephan was at the house, logged onto his computer, and then removed the hard drive, which I believe is the explanation for that extra half an hour at the house when he wasn't on his computer.
You know the unit number for your storage unit?
Yeah.
Because obviously you see the scope of what we're doing. At some point we may want to get that storage unit as well.
I was there a couple of weeks ago pulling out some tax boxes. There's not that much room in there. I mean, you could stash a body if you wanted to, if that's the case. But like I said, as far as I know, I have the only key. I don't know if there were 2 keys issued, and I haven't seen the other key for well over a year or so.
Is there a chance that he has that key?
I would say
there's always a chance,
there
right?
could be a chance because he's stolen from us, and why he would want it is beyond me. because all his stuff is that he has, guitar or what have you, is stuck in the very back. And he didn't want that, but I've ended up trying to clean out our garage, and I stuck all the other stuff there, and he wouldn't like that. Nor would I think he would spend the time to pull shit out of there to get it.
So we get a redirect again from the detectives back to the storage unit. And what is the first thing that Chris says? There's not that much room. You could stash a body if you needed to. So straight up, he's trying to put the suggestion there that, yes, focus on the storage unit. That's way more important. Focus on that, don't look at our house. And just to hammer that in, he brings up the missing key again. So here he's saying, well, there was another key, but it's been missing for over a year. Trying to play the fool, trying to act like he's got no thought that Stephan could possibly have this other key. He's so naive that the key's been missing, but don't look at Stephan. And he's waiting for the question, and they fall straight into the trap. Is it possible that Stephan has the other key? They finally ask the question that Chris has been trying to get them to ask for a while now. And he jumps on it straight away. Yes, he's stolen from us before. So he's really working hard here. He's giving so much additional narrative in terms of everything to do with Stephan possibly having access to the storage unit. And then he even goes on to talk about the motivation for Stephan having a key, because he's got a bunch of his stuff there in the back. But then it's like he is trying to play the fool. Well, of course, he's stolen from us before, so he's probably got a key. Probably because he's got stuff in the back of the storage unit. But then he wouldn't go to the bother of moving stuff to get to it. So he's giving this contradiction in his narrative, which is just really interesting. Trying to create doubt, but at the same time trying to give enough little crumbs there to make the detectives think this is where we need to focus. We need to check out the storage unit because that's possibly where Stephan has been. Now, I do wonder too if, in fact, Stephan has had a key for that storage unit all along, and this is totally irrelevant, the pretending that he doesn't know where the key is. Because if Stephan's got a bunch of stuff in the storage unit, wouldn't it be logical for him to have a key? Unless, of course, they really, really don't trust him not to steal stuff. And because his stuff is in the back. So maybe that's what Chris is implying there. Like, well, we wouldn't have actually given him that extra key because all his stuff is in the back anyway, and he would have to move our stuff to get to it. So he's working very hard, if you ask me, to create a particular narrative. And that particular narrative is Chris himself believes that Stephan couldn't possibly have a key to the storage unit. But wait a minute, maybe I was wrong and maybe I gave one to him in the past that I forgot about, but I'm not going to say that outright. I want you to try and figure that out for yourself. And maybe the missing key is because Stephan took it to steal from us. So this guy doesn't lie, I think. Not outright lies. He may twist the truth a bit, and maybe he does lie at times, but it seems that his strength in terms of deception is to just make suggestions and let people run with them.
And your wife, by chance, wouldn't have went to the storage for any reason?
She wouldn't even know where it is.
And Jen was with you this whole time, right? So
Well, wait. When I don't know where Jen was until she called me at 11,
okay, at 11.
and she said, "Hey, Stephan's not here. Is he with you?"
Okay.
So then he made up this story of getting lost and whatever. So there we go.
So it's interesting that he suddenly becomes very, very animated when they say, well, Jen was with you. And he's like, well, no, wait. He doesn't want them to think that Jen has any sort of alibi with him. I don't know where Jen was until she rang. So he's putting himself on an island here. He's separating himself from Jen and Stephan. And I think part of that comes down to, we've heard both him and Deb in a subsequent interview make allegations against Jen. So I think here he doesn't want to get Jen off the hook. And he wants to perhaps create doubt as to if Jen was at the hotel. He also wants to, by the sounds of it, separate himself from both of them, because the way he's speaking here, he either believes that Jen somehow was involved with the trip to Northport, or he just wants to dump her in it. Now, I don't know the motivation there, unless, of course, here he is trying to move the narrative on a bit and suggest that maybe because it was Jen's car, that it was Jen who went down there. Although I don't think he was doing that, because he does talk about seeing Jen at the hotel when he went back from his office. So I'm not sure why he's so vehement about disconnecting himself from Jen there. But I do think it's definitely got something to do with his narrative.
So anyway, it wouldn't surprise me if somehow he stole the key out of my car, because I put all the keys there.
Okay.
So I had.
Does he have access to your car?
He would.
He would.
Because I would keep the keys on my desk. He could easily go in there. And who's saying this?
Now, I'm pretty certain he is referring to the missing key here, because obviously Stephan couldn't have stolen the one existing key from Stearns' car by going and getting it off his desk, because they were all at a hotel in Northport. So he is basically pushing the whole narrative still of the storage unit. Well, now, I've had time to think about it, and, well, gosh darn, I think he probably did steal the key, because I kept the keys in my car, and he could have quite easily gotten the keys off my desk for my car and gone and stolen that extra key, and I never would have noticed. And I mean, that could be what has occurred. Although I do question why Stephan would have bothered, before all this happened, to get a key for the storage unit, because like Chris said, why would he bother moving any of Chris and Deb's stuff to get to any of his stuff that's out the back of the storage unit? Anything that's been put in the storage unit would be stuff that's probably inconsequential. You know, it's like the stuff that you put in your garage for storage because you can't quite bear to get rid of it, but you're not using it anymore. So I wouldn't be surprised if that spare key was just sitting at the house, and that this was probably just a concocted narrative to point people at the storage unit. Because the whole narrative that's going on here is essentially, don't look at our house, don't come to the house because there's no reason to, go to the storage unit. He's got to have been at the storage unit. In fact, we're missing a key, and now I'm pretty certain that he actually stole the key from my car. So you can see what's going on here. He's really trying to convince them to be looking at the storage unit. Does he actually believe that Stephan went down there to go to the storage unit? We don't know. The information that he is lacking at this point in time is how long Stephan was down there for. So he doesn't know that Stephan was down there for way longer than what would be a feasible amount of time for someone to go into a storage locker. The other thing is, we don't know what the inside of that storage unit is like. I know people have mistakenly looked at crime scene photos, well, not crime scene photos, but photos that were released from the storage units of what is basically the back half of one of those storage units converted into an office. And that is all the surveillance stuff for the complex. That's not the Stearns' storage unit. And I've actually shown that in, I think, my debunking video that I did. I did a video correcting a lot of mistakes, and I've shown that all the images we have from the storage unit, none of them are from inside Chris's storage unit. So we don't know how crowded it is. So we can't actually say if he could actually believe that Stephan could have stashed a body in there. Don't forget, at this point though, they had already said to Chris that they believed Maddie was still alive. So why has he jumped to stashing a body when they're saying we believe Maddie is still alive?
Would it be safe to say and accurate that your son had no rights to this storage unit at all?
If he asked my permission, I would allow it.
Did he ever ask you permission?
No.
Okay.
And again, like I said, I've been missing this key for how long have I had this? Maybe I've had this key for maybe 18 months.
Okay.
So again, he has to reiterate the fact that there's a missing key. This is something that he repeatedly brings up. So on one hand, don't look at our house. He couldn't possibly have gotten in because the front keypad wasn't working. He doesn't have a fob for the garage, and the lock was on the slider. And we're going to ignore the back door. Don't look at our house. But let me tell you, for the umpteenth time, I'm missing a key for my storage unit.
Because it was 10:45, she calls and said, "Is Stephan with you?" And I go, "No."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, he hasn't been here for 25 minutes."
And that's probably, I'm assuming, like she woke up, it's been 25 minutes, and he hadn't shown up.
Yeah, I expected him to return, and he never returned.
Yeah.
And then he showed up maybe towards 11:30. Yeah, maybe it was like 11:30.
Yeah.
Now, Stephan and Jen both claim to be time blind, but Chris certainly seems to be, because his timeline is all over the place up until the later interview when he basically gets his times from a notepad where he has clearly gone through his phone and grabbed the specific times based on communication on his phone. Let's not forget that at that point in time, he would have known that detectives had seized both Jen and Stephan's phones, so they would have seen that communication anyway. But it's just interesting that he's out by an hour in terms of Jen contacting him. Jen actually contacted him at 9:45, not 10:45. And then he's like, Stephan arrived at 11:30. Well, Stephan got back at 11. So the discrepancy there is that in Chris's mind, that would make it over an hour and a half from when Jen contacted him to when Stephan got back, as opposed to 45 minutes, when the actual time is 15 minutes from Jen ringing Chris to Stephan turning up. I don't know if it's one of those things just because he's retired. I mean, the guy's in his 70s, he's retired. Maybe you just don't really bother worrying about time when you're retired. I don't know. But it's one thing that has baffled me with Chris. The huge discrepancies time-wise. That's probably a rabbit hole that's not necessary for this video. But he is, again, giving so much information here and over-telling the story about Stephan not being where he was meant to be at the right time.
Just too many inconsistencies here, and his behavior is indicating something else is going on here. You know, why would he spend nearly 6 hours driving round trip to go to Northport to the storage unit?
Well,
I mean,
hopefully we may be able to figure that out.
The body was in Jen's car.
So here, as far as Chris is concerned, the only possibility for Stephan going to Northport was to access that storage unit. Note, there's no speculation as to why did he go to Northport. It's more, why did he bother within a 6-hour trip to go to the storage unit? So he's really, really pushing this idea of Stephan accessing the storage unit, which he didn't do. And then he says, unless he had the body in Jen's car. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because in Jen's video interview, when they're pushing her for scenarios, she's like, well, why did he go down to Northport? Unless he had her body in the boot of my car. Bit of communication happening there, clearly. And I've covered that in another video. But Chris is determined here to get the notion across that the only possibility in terms of Stephan going to Northport would be that he went to the storage unit. He doesn't want them to look at the house at all.
No, she's never been to that storage unit.
How does he know the code to your code to the storage unit? Is it written down somewhere?
No. So I was thinking about that earlier. So there's another incident here. So I get a call from the storage unit 2 or 3 weeks ago telling me that they were running an audit of the units because there was going to be an inspection or something, and my unit wasn't properly locked. So the way it works is that you've got this slide mechanism, you know, unlock it and then unbolt it from the hinge, and then you have to push it back and then secure it in one of the 2 holes. And they said it wasn't properly locked, and they had flagged it, and I needed to get over there and fix it. So I went over there, opened it up, looked at it, everything's fine, and then locked it properly. And I'm going to say maybe there's a 50-50 chance I did that, but I'm pretty anal about it. And so I don't know.
A 50-50 chance you did what? What do you mean?
Pardon?
A 50-50 chance you did what?
I may not have locked it properly, or maybe now that I'm aware that he possibly had a key to it, that he went into the unit.
Okay.
But nothing out of the ordinary.
Has he ever gone to the unit to help you with something and you gave
Oh, he's
him
helped me load it up, yeah.
Okay. So he could have the code for that.
Maybe he observed me punch it in the code,
Okay.
which is pretty devious on his part.
So again, you have this really simple question that only requires a simple answer. Would he have the code for your storage unit? But Chris, takes forever to get there. That clip was like a minute and a half. He didn't get there till the end of that clip. He talks about the audit of the storage units and his not being properly locked. And he's definitely working hard to establish the notion that Stephan must have got into it, because he's like, I'm 50% that I did actually lock it properly. I'm pretty anal about it. Now, if you ask someone, how certain are you of something? If they are certain, they're going to say, I'm 100% certain. If there's a fair amount of doubt, they're like, oh, well, I'm 90% certain, that there's a possibility. So when someone says 50-50, what that boils down to is he's saying it is highly unlikely for him to have not locked his storage unit properly. So he is opening up here the suggestion that, well, I'm missing a key. I've told you this 50 million times now. And, oh, you want to know about the code? Well, here's an interesting story. Somebody got into the storage unit a few weeks ago, and it wasn't me, because I'm pretty certain that I actually do lock it properly every time. That's what is being implied here. And then, finally, after going through this long story about the audit and not being locked properly, yada yada, he says, yeah, maybe he observed me punching in the code. So he's working really, really hard here to, without being really direct and saying, sure, I believe he got into the storage unit. I reckon he's got the key and I reckon he knows the code. Instead, he's going about it sideways. But he's making sure that he establishes that there's a good chance that he's got the key and there's a good chance that he's got the code. None of it is Chris's fault, of course. It's all Stephan being sneaky. And of course we know Stephan actually didn't go near the storage unit. I suspect Chris knows that Stephan didn't go near the storage unit. But he's worked hard to push this narrative, and detectives are running with it. I mean, they got a warrant. They were going to burst down the door of the storage unit without a warrant, and then they were like, well, okay, now that we've seen what's on Stephan's phone, we're going to wait and get a warrant and have a look. But he's worked really hard to redirect attention from the house over to the storage unit, which I find really interesting.
9:49, she called me, it lasted for about a minute to ask me if Stephan was with me. Mm-hmm. I go, no. Well, he's not here. How long has he been gone? Maybe 25 minutes. I said, okay, well, all right, maybe he's out running around, whatever. So then I get a call from her about at 10:17. Don't recall what that conversation was about. Then there was another call at 10:47, and I think matter of fact, I try to recall what time we talked about his not being there, and then I called back and said, I told her, I said, go down to the lobby. If he was gone for 25 minutes, go down to the lobby. Maybe he's down there. It seemed logical. And then after I hung up, I called her back. I said, are your car keys there? And she said, no. I said, okay, interesting. So then I get a call back from her later and saying that the detective had called and said they were going to come over within the hour to visit with them. And I said, okay, I'm on my way. So I left the office and drove over there and thinking, well, he's going to be in a world of hurt if he's not there when they come back because they'll probably put a bolo out on him and then just decide to arrest him because he's wandering around. What's he doing?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't understand why Jen and Chris both kept pushing this notion of pretty much having Stephan on house arrest in the hotel. Because he's not at the hotel, they can put a bolo out on his ass? Well, no. Probably not, unless he was gone for like 24 hours. And then they might ask questions, and they'd probably be looking for Jen's car. But just for them to turn up and Stephan not be there, well, there's no cause. He's not named as a suspect at that point in time. There's no arrest warrant out for him. So it was really, really odd to hear Chris saying this. But he's really making it clear that he knows nothing about his son's movements here. Maybe he didn't know anything about them. But it's once again, he's really hitting home with this story. It's a long story. There's so many details added to it. Do we care if he was at the office? Is it relevant? Why add it in? Probably because it's over-explaining. And when someone over-explains, you've got to ask why. So many details here. And why do you need to give the times? Maybe that's just because he was a cop for a few years and he thinks he's being efficient. But really? I don't know. Maybe that I'm just overthinking it. In terms of his 10:17, I don't know what that was for. I'm pretty certain that if Jen did ring him at 10:17, that's probably when she rang him to say that detectives would have been on their way, because her ringing him at 10:45, which I think he said, to say detectives were on their way, wouldn't have allowed time for him to haul his ass back to the hotel, as he says, from his office and be there 10 minutes later walking into the lobby. So, unless the whole thing is just fabricated. So I'd say that the 10:17 would have been her ringing to say detectives are on the way. No Stephan. He's consistent with his story at least, but it is such a drastic over-explanation. Why not just say, well, the detectives were coming, I got back, Stephan arrived a bit later. Stephan only got back from wherever he was just before the detectives arrived, or something like that. It's not something that you need this really long explanation for, with multiple phone calls mentioned with specific times of those phone calls. It's like someone trying to set up an alibi.
So,
when you got back, was he there?
no, he didn't show up for another 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay.
And then do you know if Jen's car has a GPS in it? Nav system?
It does, yes.
Okay, well, it's part of his lie. So, he came back in and said, well, I got lost in the back roads of Disney, no GPS and what have you. And I didn't think about this till later and thought, wait a minute, Jen's got a newer car. Most of them have a GPS system in it. So because he didn't have a phone, and obviously he didn't have hers, he was trying to wind his way back to the hotel, but couldn't because he didn't have a GPS, when in fact he did have a GPS.
Now, there's something in that I actually have never spotted before, but I think it's significant. And I'll get to that in a minute. But he's now turned on Stephan. So originally, when he was talking about Stephan not being at the hotel and him saying, well, he said he didn't have a GPS, and heck, I got lost as well. Now that we are at the point where he knows that Stephan has been arrested, he knows that Stephan's in a spot of bother, he asks about Jen's GPS. This is also after Jen's car has been seized. So suddenly, Stephan's a liar. Well, the whole GPS thing was part of the lie, because do you know if Jen's car's got GPS? Well, I think the question there is, have you checked Jen's GPS on her car? Do you already know what's going on there? So the narrative is shifting, but only slightly. It's shifted from him being accepting of Stephan probably getting lost because he didn't have a phone on him, to Stephan is lying because, well, if you guys say Jen's car has GPS, then he must have lied. Note 2, that he said that Stephan arrived about 15 to 20 minutes after him. I really do have issues with someone seeing a 5-minute time difference as 15 to 20 minutes. Why is he pushing that side of the narrative? Now, the thing that I noticed that I have not spotted before is talking about the GPS and talking about Stephan's story of being lost on the back roads, and he says, he's talking about, well, he didn't have his phone, and then he says, well, obviously he didn't have hers in terms of Jen's phone. Well, that's an interesting thing to say. The phone tower data for Jen's phone, we've only seen part of that data, and only the bits that relate to around the time when they reported Maddie missing. So basically, Jen's phone data, what we see is her leaving the townhouse to go pick up Maddie, waiting at the school, then heading to Yolanda's. Then there's a gap in what we're shown in terms of her phone data, and we are later shown her returning home at the same time as Stearns back to the apartment. That's the only data we see from Jen's phone. So we don't know where her phone was, what it was doing other times. Is it possible that he did have her phone? Now, this is pure speculation, obviously, but why would you have to use persuasive language with, obviously, he didn't have Jen's phone? Why would you even say that? Why would that thought come to mind? It makes me question if perhaps Stephan had Jen's phone. Although, I guess, if Jen's saying detectives had contacted her and said that they were on their way, then she would have to have her phone. So I guess that puts that out the window completely. But it's still interesting that he's saying, obviously, he didn't have Jen's phone. The other possibility, of course, is that little iPhone mini that he supposedly gave Stephan at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Is it possible that he gave it to Stephan earlier and may have actually given it to him when he arrived at the hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning. Because I know for me, if I was going to be like driving to support a family member and I knew that they had their phone taken from them, probably one of the first things I would do if I had brought a phone with me to loan them would be to hand over the phone as soon as I saw them. So I have questioned I gave him the phone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it's just, at this point in time, the narrative sounds the same, but there's a definite shift in that now Stephan is essentially on his own and Stephan is deceptive. Whereas before, Stephan probably still on his own, but Stephan was just getting lost, and Chris explained it with, well, I got lost too.
There was talks of that he may have came here that morning.
Well, so when I finally got in to see Alex Wednesday evening, he said, what exit do you get off at when you come back to Northport? Tested my exit numbers, and I said, I think it's 179, Toledo Blade. And he said, did you know that Stephan was in Northport at 7:45 that morning? I said, really? No, I didn't. Then I later learned it was really 6:30ish, which meant that, and I had my timeline all screwed up. I thought they parted their room at 3:30 when in fact it was more like 2:30. So I was thinking, gosh, I just went to bed, and then he turned around and got out of there and went down to Northport. But when I learned about that, I couldn't imagine why. And then Alex is telling me, well, we have information that he went to your storage unit. So that led us down a rat hole, and then I found out that was completely wrong. That access storage facility hadn't been accessed for 2 weeks. And that was me going to put the lock back on that I had incorrectly relocked my unit 2 weeks ago, now almost 3 weeks ago. So that was wrong. The time of his entering Northport was wrong. It was really an hour earlier, hour and 15 minutes earlier, and he never went access the storage unit. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, he must have been really disappointed if he was coming to this house because he couldn't get in the front door, and that door was locked, and he knew that if he came in, chances are he would put the dogs on high alert.
So the prompt was, there was talks that he may have come here in terms of gone to their house. Well, Chris then goes off on another drastic over explanation. And he goes back to talking about the storage unit and how their times were wrong because actually he was here around 6:30, not 7:45. So I'm not sure if that's information that was given to him by Northport Police and we just don't have a record of that, or if he's just giving himself away in terms of knowing what time Stephan arrived at the house. Couldn't say either or until we get hold of more stuff from Northport. I don't know how Paula's going with getting some of that stuff. There's a lot of stuff that seems to be really hard to get hold of. But he goes back to the whole storage unit story and all this stuff to simply say, yes, apparently he was down here. But then he also goes back to, even though the storage unit is now off the table, and he now goes back to the explanation of, oh, well, it was definitely me who didn't lock it properly. So he's backtracking on everything now that it is known for certain that Stephan didn't go to the storage unit. But he's also saying, well, he must have come to try and get into the house, but he couldn't possibly have gotten into the house. So now, from trying to draw attention away from the house, now that it is known that Stephan wasn't anywhere near the storage unit, he still wants to try and control the narrative. here, essentially, and make it clear that, well, since the only other option with him not going to the storage unit is that he must have come to the house, we need to control the narrative here and make it clear that there's not a remote possibility of him actually getting into the house. So now we're getting back to the stories of the security of the house, essentially. No way that he could have gotten himself in, and also he would have put the dogs on alert. Well, would he have put the dogs on alert because he lived there? I mean, okay, when my sister or my brother-in-law come over to visit, my dogs do get a little bit excited and they rush to the door and say hello, but I wouldn't say that would be high alert. I think, I mean, there's been so many times if I've been out in the backyard, I've not known that my sister's arrived until she walks out the back door and I'm like, whoa, crap, where did you come from? And I would imagine that it would be a similar situation with the Stearns' house. I can't see why the dogs would go on high alert with someone who actually lives there. And I mean, going back to my dogs, while I say they do get excited when my sister comes over, that's because they only see her once or twice a week. When I get home from somewhere, they get excited, but they're not barking or anything. They're just, wanting to follow me and shadow me everywhere in the house until they get let out the back. So I'm just not buying it.
And set him off, which would have got her up, and I asked her, I said, what would you have done if Stephan was standing in the middle of the house and you weren't expecting him? It's like, what are you doing here? And God knows what would have taken place at that point and why he was here.
Where's your dad? Why are you here?
Now, he blew the story there when he said, God knows what would have taken place. Because Stephan lived there. So what would have taken place? Well, it probably just would have been a conversation between him and Deb as to what the F are you doing here? And from what we know of Deb, probably would have been a case of, okay, so let's sort things out. I know that probably sounds unfair to some people, but we've heard a lot of situations where Deb has covered his ass. So they're putting a hypothetical here that had he gone down there and gotten into the house, the dogs would have told Deb that he was there, and there would have been questions raised, and God knows what would have taken place. Like it would have been some sort of drama and perhaps Deb was in danger or something. And the way they're saying it implies that none of that happened. This is a hypothetical. Had it happened, this would have happened. But because we're saying it as a hypothetical, that means it never happened. Well, okay, but how was he then logged onto Google? How was that hard drive removed from that computer after he'd been logged on from Google? Because the only alternative there is that Chris or Deb removed that hard drive. Now, people have said, well, what if he was accessing the Wi-Fi from outside? Yes, that could be a possibility with his own phone. But Google requires two-step authentication. And even if it's a device that has some time back been connected to Google but isn't regularly connected to Google, it is still going to ask for that authentication. So I rarely use my laptop because it's so slow. When I use my laptop, anytime I want to go into my Google Drives, I have to go through the authentication process again because it's not a regular device that I use. I have the app on my iPad and my iPhone, so I can go straight in, but not on my laptop. So Stephan didn't have his phone, which was clearly his number one thing for accessing Google. All his images were previously on his phone. Images he had taken on his phone, meaning that his computer was a secondary device. It sounds like he was logged on to Google, but couldn't access various things without passwords. That's what I am getting from the information we have, because they do mention that, according to the FBI cast, he was logged on to Google, but in another report they say that he had attempted to access his Google Drive, I think, or his emails or something. So there was some sort of difficulty with accessing things. But in terms of going back to what I was saying for could he have accessed it from outside, unless he had a tablet of some sort that was regularly connected to Google and he had done so that way, then it seems most likely to me that he would have had to have done so from inside. It seems too coincidental that he has tried to access Google at their house. There's been a missing half hour of time when he's been doing something at that house not connected to the internet, and the hard drive has gone missing. Those sorts of things, any detective will tell you, you look for the most logical explanation. The most logical explanation here is that he entered the house, he got onto his own computer, attempted to access his images probably, was probably connected to Google, tried to access his images, couldn't get in, decided to remove the hard drive instead. That is the most logical explanation, which then suggests that he definitely had to be in the house. So why are Deb and Chris pushing it so hard that he couldn't possibly have been in the house?
Why did I go to Orlando? Because I can tell you the amount of time I spent with him, aggregately, 3 occasions, was a total of 30, 35 minutes. It's the amount of time that I had spent with him. Because when he got back to that hotel room, the both of them went back to bed, and they slept. And there was no waking the dead. And up until 2 o'clock, I'm trying to get him to eat something. Jen and I went down and had some lunch, but I have no idea why he was here, other than to get in the house, to get something, maybe try to steal some money from me, maybe steal something of value, to sell it, what have you. I have no idea.
So now he's introducing the prospect that he must have been down there to try and steal something from them, to get into the house. Completely thrown away the storage unit idea for now, because that's been disproven. Still pushing the idea that he couldn't possibly have gotten into the house, saying he must have come down here to try and get into the house to steal something, basically implying that he didn't get into the house, and nothing is stolen, because obviously he would say, well, he got into the house and he stole this, he stole money, yada yada. So the implication with this is basically he came down here for nothing. Because he couldn't get into the house, he must have been wanting to steal something, but I would tell you if something was stolen, so he didn't get into the house.
Now, I was told by Northport PD when they came and talked to, I'm assuming you, one night, that you may have mentioned the dogs barking sometime throughout the night.
They went on high alert, and I looked at my watch because I was in here alone. 3:19 in the morning, I had all 5 of them sleeping with me since he wasn't here to sleep with the boys. They all went from dead asleep to springing up in the air and standing on all 4 feet, all of them looking at my window and giving the war bark. That's not a war bark. That's a wolf.
Yeah.
When they do it, it's a sound that will make your skin
Wake to death.
goosebumps. And I didn't have the gun in my room. I don't usually keep it in there. I had to come and look for a flashlight. I let all the dogs out here. And then I did not unlock the security lock on the door. I just took the flashlight and went like this to see if there was a critter in the yard. We have bobcats, we have all kinds of stuff out here. So, didn't see anything in the yard. Didn't see anything out the front. Went and looked through the office window. Didn't see anything out there. So, didn't see a car. I thought, okay, well, we must have had a critter, and I just missed it. You know, they dig holes and come under the fence and drive the dogs nuts. Rabbits especially, we had one last night.
Again, the dog story becomes a really long-winded story. And she's making it clear that, well, there was nothing out there. But we know that if it was 3:19, then obviously Stephan wasn't out there. Now, what I find really interesting here is that this is a woman whose husband was a travelling salesman for many, many years. And she was left at home with a young son. So it's not like now she would be that worried about being home alone when Chris wasn't there. And when you've got, 5 massive standard poodles in the house, why would you feel concerned? It's an interesting thing to hear her saying, especially when she gets that whole bravado thing going on Hidden True Crime and talks about someone ringing her and saying there's a man in the woods, and she's like, oh honey, this is the South, there's always men in the woods, or something like that, making it sound like she is the sort of person who's not bothered by things going on outside the house. But there's something there that is interesting. She talks about, I didn't unlock the security lock on the door, in other words, the front door. And I guess that's logical if you're checking the perimeter and you're saying that you were concerned, you didn't see a car out on the street, and she really emphasised that, then you're also going to be like, well, I didn't unlock the security door because I wanted to be safe. But she's just mentioned she let the dogs out. So she's let the dogs out in the backyard. Clearly, the backyard is fenced so you can let the dogs out. Because you're not going to let the dogs out in the neighbourhood to run rampant. What sort of door lock do they have on their back door? Because it's clearly not one with a security lock. That's on the front door that she was referring to there. So we're supposed to believe that the dogs react so much to everything that they reacted at 3:19, so Stephan couldn't possibly have come into or near the house at 3:19 because of the dogs. So we're back to that part of the story again. And just in case anyone might question the time that the dogs went on alert, she has to emphasise there was no car out on the street. Maybe she just over-explains everything. Maybe they both just over-explain everything. But these people do a lot of talking for a lot of irrelevant stuff.
And you're saying that your code to the storage facility was not used on that Tuesday?
No, the storage unit, Northport Police told me was, they misread it but they said the last access, because I didn't think Stephan had my access code unless when we were there in December he decided to memorize it, and I keep it in my contacts because obviously I don't use it that often. I'm not going to commit to memory, but I was there 2 weeks ago because they called me up and said, hey, we're doing an audit. We got an audit that's going to happen, and we check all the units, and you didn't lock your unit properly. So it's just slided over, bolted, and then it's got 2 holes. You drop your padlock in there and lock it. Well, apparently I locked it on the outside. I didn't think I did, but anyway, I must have. So I went over there the next day and properly locked it.
It kind of sounds like he's hedging his bets a bit here. On one hand, he starts off with the acceptance that Northport basically made a mistake and that Stephan wasn't at the storage unit and that he couldn't possibly have got the code. But then he goes back onto this story about the storage unit not being properly locked and that he thinks he locked it properly. So he's hedging his bets just in case their data is wrong. I think that's what he's doing there. Because clearly when they start talking about the house, they're trying to give the impression there's no chance that Stephan could possibly get in. So he wants to keep that storage unit there as a backup, just in case, by the sounds of it. But at the same time, he's moving away from that narrative. He's still giving a lot of details, but it seems like he's basically going, well, keep this just as a possibility in mind, just in case Northport did screw up and Stephan did actually get to the storage unit. We know he didn't. Chris has been told that he didn't. But it's also possible that Chris hasn't been told all the details, in that they had actually printed out every access code from that particular morning and know every single individual that was there. And they also went through all the access times for Chris's storage unit. So they well and truly ruled out the possibility of Stephan having been there. But of course, they don't need to explain all that to Chris.
Just gaining access to this house, and there's no way he would have broken in here because impact window's not going to do that, and the front door not working, so he would screw blue tattoo. I checked the car, after the Northport police left to see if there was any marks on the door to see if he had tried to pry the car open, but nope, I didn't see any marks on it. So I guess he was here for an hour and 15 minutes or so before he had to make tracks to get back to Orlando, but have no idea what he did for that amount of time. Maybe he came down here thinking he would throw the police off. If they obviously found a way to track him or something, maybe they said, well, he disposed of the body or disposed of something down here, but have no idea. Other than just coming here and stealing something from us.
I don't know why he brings up the impact windows. He couldn't have broken in because we have impact windows. Well, okay, he couldn't have broken in by smashing a window because it would be obvious and you would have a broken window. So, unless he's trying to infer that he's so capable that he can break in, smash a window and then replace the window. It's just not a logical thing to say. And then he brings up the door lock again, after Deb pointing out that there's that back door that they let the dogs in and out of. Well, there was a latch on the front door apparently, but, if I wanted to sneak into someone's house, even if it is a quiet street like theirs, I probably would go in through the back door if I knew the house well enough to get in that way. And maybe Stephan's bedroom is back by the back door. For that matter, maybe Stephan's bedroom window was open or unlatched. Who knows? But to totally dismiss the possibility of Stephan getting into the house, saying it's impossible because they've got impact windows and because of the door latch the door lock being faulty. Well, okay, but there are other ways in. For all we know, Deb could have just let him in. And then he goes back to talking about Stephan having been down there for an hour and 15 minutes. Well, damn, that's really specific. Which goes back to the question I asked before. Did someone at Northport say to Chris that Stephan was there between 6:30 and 7:45? Because earlier he said, oh, I thought that he'd been there around 7:45, but I found out later that it was earlier than that, it was 6:30. Well, how, where? From Northport? And if he's dismissing the 7:45, why is he adding it back into the equation now? And instead of saying that they made a mistake time-wise and that the time was meant to be 6:30, not 7:45, why is he now calculating all that together and going, he was here for an hour and 15 minutes? Because that is the exact amount of time that he was there for. It's such a pain not having everything from Northport, because I would like to know about conversations between him and Northport Police to find out if they had actually told him that Stephan was there for an hour and 15 minutes. But then he's again doing the, now that you're looking at the house because the storage unit is off the agenda, let's come up with a bunch of unlikely scenarios to basically convince you that, well, why would he bother wanting to get into the house anyway? So he's saying, well, maybe he came down here to dispose of the body or dispose of something. In the house? I don't think so. So that rules out the house, of course. Or maybe he wanted to steal from us. And of course, what is being inferred there is that basically, if he were to have stolen from them, they would be telling the detectives about it. He came into the house. We know he came into the house because he stole something. But that's not the story that we're getting. So now that the focus is moving back towards the house and the storage unit is off the table, the goal here appears to be to make it clear that A, there's no way Stephan could have possibly gotten into the house, and B, there's no real motivation, because saying he came down to get rid of the body, well, obviously he's not going to hide the body in the house. And this is after Northport Police have already been in and checked out the house, which of course rules out the possibility of the body being in the house. So you can see there has been a shift, and this has come from the information that he's been given by detectives. Could be that he's just doing a lot of hypothesising, but it's just really interesting when we know that Stephan accessed the Google account. He was there for an hour and a quarter. The hard drive was gone. And yet Chris is doing everything in his power to convince detectives that there's no way known that Stephan could have got into the house. Well, clearly there was.
I seriously don't know what he would have done if he'd had access to the house. But what he didn't realize is that when Chris leaves, this house gets locked up like like Fort Knox, whatever it is. But because I never lock that door because it's a pain in the butt to get it up into the security position. And Elliot dislocated my thumb, so not one of these dogs are ripped a tendon. So I'm right-handed, so it's even harder. But I did do that because I don't know.
I do want.
Again, over-explaining and over-exaggeration. Why would you say, I don't know what would have happened had he gone into the house? He lived there. What would have happened? Were you a decent individual and your son had turned up at your house at 6 a.m. in the morning when he's supposed to be up at Orlando dealing with a missing child situation, then you would probably be calling the police. But other than that, what did she think would have happened? It's just a really odd comment to make given their living arrangements. And again, we get this whole notion of trying to convince you that there's no way he could have got into the house. The house was locked up like Fort Knox. And she put the slider on the door. But she doesn't know why. Which contradicts her statement of when Chris is not here, it's locked up like Fort Knox. She's saying that she doesn't usually put that slider on, but this time she did. That's a bit convenient, isn't it? To say, this slider that I never use, this time round, I put it on the door. And also, the door keypad was broken, so he couldn't have got in that way. Oh, and by the way, the cameras were disconnected also. So no, we can't show you anything that might suggest he was here. But at the same time, there's all these additional security measures which mean that he couldn't possibly have gotten into the house. Just this one off, we put the security lock across. I just find it a little bit interesting. They're trying so very hard to convince detectives that there's just no way known that Stephan could have possibly gotten into the house.
I know you touched on it earlier, but you said Stephan didn't have, that to your knowledge, Stephan didn't have access to your storage unit.
No.
To my what?
To your
No,
knowledge.
to my storage unit, no.
Who all has access to it? Just you.
Just me.
I don't
Okay.
even have a key to it.
And when I ask access, is it a code to get into the secured gate and then a padlock?
Yes.
Okay. And only you have those codes.
I have the code. It's in my phone as a contact record.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I know, he didn't have that code. Now I am missing a key and have been missing the second key for over a year. So when they first started telling me about he came down to access the unit, I started thinking, well, that explains where the other key is then. But I could have lost it, but I have no idea where the key is. And the only way to know whether or not anybody else accessed that is if the storage unit printed out it. Mm-hmm. And because I don't access it that often.
So I was here the morning that the storage unit was searched. Is there anything of like tremendous value in there? I know there's a bunch of bins and I see a few suitcases and stuff like that.
Yeah, just overflow from the garage.
Some Christmas
I was going to go over and look to see if anything had been moved because I couldn't imagine Stephan going in there. There should have been a bunch of dog crates piled up, and it's packed other than just a small section between the bulk stuff and the racks that I have there where I have access on the right.
He did have some boxes of his stuff. But
Yes, but it's way so far back that he would have to empty the whole storage unit out to get it.
Okay.
Back in the left-hand corner. It's well, that's too much work. He wouldn't be willing to do that much work.
So at that point in time, there was clearly a breakdown in communication, and Northport didn't actually communicate to this particular detective that they had actually cleared the storage unit and that there was no way Stephan had gotten into the storage unit. Chris knew at this point in time that the storage unit was off the table, and yet he once again grabbed hold of that story, once again talked about the missing key, And he latched onto it again, even though he had been told that it was basically, it wasn't in something to be factored in because they had got the code time wrong and that nobody had actually accessed the storage unit. So he's very, very eager, suddenly, to forget the fact that actually, no, he knows the storage unit isn't part of the scenario, but apparently this detective doesn't know that, or this detective is maybe testing him out, and he's once again latched onto the, I'm missing a key, he's probably accessed the storage unit because I'm missing a key.
Off. But then, you know, it carried forward into Wednesday. I don't think I would have come up, but then I wouldn't have learned some other things about her had an outcome. But it's like, why was I brought to Orlando? Unless to get me out of the house.
Which left me here alone.
So I have no idea, but
I think reintroducing the storage unit has thrown him for a loop, because then he introduces this notion of that they must have got him to go to Orlando to get him out of the house, leaving Deb there on her own. Why that would make a difference, I'm not sure, except perhaps that Chris is an early riser, according to them, whereas Deb is one of these night owls that goes to bed late and gets up late. So maybe the idea here is that they wanted to get Chris out of the house because he would have been awake if Stephan was trying to enter the house. But by implying this, he's now suggesting that it is a possibility for Stephan to get into the house. So he's faltered a little bit with his story here.
more Maddie
There was, well, the thumb drive that you provided.
was okay. So there was stuff off of that.
So there, I can tell you there was a. So identifying those individuals, it'd be almost nearly impossible.
30,000.
Yes, sir.
What about the hard drive?
The hard drive was not used when the forensics unit got it. I don't think it was used since like 2020 or something like that.
Well, why did he go to the extent of hiding the damn thing? Because like I said, he was on that computer Sunday morning, and then I assumed when I handed it over that it was...
that the desktop that you handed us
Yep.
there was not a hard drive in it.
Right, and then that surprised me. And then when I went to move out of the storage unit, it was at a location at the back. And if you've seen photos, there was a rack of shelves. And
Yeah, I was there that night when we did this.
okay, so you could easily slide back to the rear of that, and from where it was, you could easily tuck in where I found the hard drive. You could have easily just placed it.
Right.
So I don't know if he.
But yeah,
did
there
it.
was no activity on the hard drive for years.
Huh.
So we don't know where the hard drive on the computer that he was using when you said you saw him using the computer, where that hard drive is.
Oh, this isn't the same hard drive? Oh.
Because if he was using it that morning,
Yeah.
we would have been able to tell through the forensics dump.
Right.
And no, it hasn't been used since, like I want to say like 2020 maybe.
Okay, so it was an assumption on my part that was the same hard drive. But I don't know how he put that hard drive in it, and I don't know how he put that in there. So he must have just destroyed the thing.
Right.
It would have made
Which we don't.
best sense to do that for sure, but too bad he wasn't smart enough about the phone. Not that I would be encouraging that, but still.
Now, it was really fascinating listening to him trying to do a bit of a U-turn there and reframe the narrative, because he brought up the USB drives. Now, don't forget, they were found in Stephan's bedroom. And then he moves on to the hard drives that he gave them. And the story is here that the hard drive was found in the back of the storage unit. Now, he has previously said on 2 occasions that Stephan's stuff at the back of the storage unit was inaccessible. You couldn't get to it. He would have had to take everything out to get to it. Now he's introduced the idea that you would have had to, you could get to it if you slid along a particular section to get up the back. So he has, I suspect because of the miscommunication in the previous interview over the storage unit, he's gone with the storage unit narrative again, and then it's like, look, I found this hard drive in the back of the storage unit, even though I told you before that there's no way Stephan could have gotten to the back of the storage unit. He also has been previously told that the storage unit is off the table. But he's decided to run with this whole idea of the hard drive out of Stephan's computer that I handed over that didn't have a hard drive in it. But they point out that that hard drive hadn't been used for a number of years. And that took the wind out of his sail, and his whole narrative just got really, really confused then. Because he kept trying to push the whole idea of the hard drive being in the back of the storage unit, and then it's like he realised what was going on, and they're saying that's not the hard drive out of the computer. So he has to do this quick about face, and he doesn't know how to respond to it, and he says, well, he must have destroyed that hard drive then, which essentially admits that Stephan had to have been in the house. So he's tried really, really hard to steer everything away from Stephan entering the house. And then he's gone on this fishing expedition, essentially. He went to the police department in July. He was asking these questions, trying to get answers clearly. That's the way it comes across to me. And it comes out that the hard drive that he handed them wasn't the one out of the computer. And that's completely messed up his narrative. And he's tried to continue with the narrative of the hard drive in the storage unit having been hidden there. And then he realises he's got to redo the narrative, and he's stuck. It's just very interesting.
And I wonder, and because Jennifer called me, as I shared with you, I thought around 9:45 to ask me if I knew what Stephan was.
That's when he was on his way back.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was just, she was playing me with that, knowing that he left and went down there, but again, can't figure out why he went down to Northport, because by the time he would have arrived, would have put him at past 6 o'clock. And
well, we know exactly what time he was. Once again, I don't remember what time it was, but we can put him within less than a mile from your house through dash cam video from Northport PD that was working a crash showed him in the car at that point. So we know exactly what time he was there, but what time he came back, I don't remember what time it was.
Okay. Did you ever confirm that he went to the storage unit?
The records from the storage unit were kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
You know, it looked like somebody used your access code, but when we talked to him again, they said the dates and times, they may have been mistaken. So whether he was there or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Weird. Because like I said, and as Debbie shared, she said the dogs went on full alert around 5 something, but you know, anything could have spooked him, but definitely he wasn't in Northport at that time, so it's just curious as to why. I don't know if he tried to I don't know if he tried to come to the house and maybe the dogs didn't go on full alert because he again talked about getting access to his guns, and then he could have accessed a couple of other guns he had at the house.
But he had one gun with him. So any reason why he would want his other guns?
He was in possession of the gun when he was in the white Nissan. Because my understanding is the police had confiscated
they took the silver Lincoln, which had the 27th, I believe, when KPD officers went out to talk to Jen and Stephan about the disappearance of Maddie. They checked the cars, and inside Stephan's car was a gun.
Right.
So then, at some point, he takes that gun, puts it inside the house, and when they did the search warrant on the house, that's when they recovered that gun.
Okay.
So whether he went down there to get another gun,
well, because he said I went to get the guns because I was considering killing myself, and so now that makes sense. He would have come down to Northport to try to get into the house to get the guns, and maybe he came up to the house and found out that he couldn't get into the house. The dogs didn't go on full alert, and so that makes sense. So that's probably what he was doing. Again, kind of confirming his comment about wanting to get the guns. So he only had the one at the townhouse, which didn't make sense, but now coming down to Northport to do that would make sense.
So you probably noticed that the detective here that was talking with him was very careful about giving him out specific information and was avoiding answering particular things. So even with the storage unit, he's like, did you ever confirm that he'd accessed the storage unit? And they were like, oh, well, the information on that was kind of wishy-washy. They knew at that point in time that he hadn't accessed the storage unit. Now, Chris has essentially been told that the hard drive was gone from the tower, and he's saying Stephan must have destroyed it. Now, that basically is essentially admitting Stephan entered the house, removed the hard drive, and destroyed it. But he doesn't go with that notion. He's trying to distract from that idea. He once again wants to push the idea that Stephan couldn't possibly have gotten into the house. It's like he wants them to forget the fact that the hard drive is gone. Well, they've got that as a fact. It's documented. They're not going to forget it. But instead, he starts talking about the guns, pushing the narrative of him. He talked about getting access to his guns and saying that he went there to get the guns because he was considering unaliving himself. Well, if Stephan said that, we know that's a lie because Stephan's too much of a coward to do something like that. But the thing is, Chris has come out with this after trying to push all these other scenarios at this point in time. Meaning that he has tried to continue to push the storage unit scenario, and that just got shot down. He's tried to push the scenario of the hard drive being hidden in the storage unit. That got shut down because that wasn't the actual hard drive. And he's still working on it all. And then suddenly out of the blue remembers that, Stephan mentioned that he wanted to get hold of his guns to unalive himself. I'm sorry, but wouldn't that be something at the forefront of your mind if your child had said that they had wanted to unalive themselves? Wouldn't that be something that would actually be distressing enough that it wouldn't be an afterthought after speculating several other reasons why your child might have gone down to Northport, made a 2-3 hour drive to Northport, and then you add it as an afterthought after speculating several other things, and so you say that he said that that's why he went down there? So the narrative has definitely shifted, and the way it's been done is different from Stephan's way of... When Stephan shifted the narratives, it was so obvious because he just completely changed his story. But what Chris has done is that he's gradually built on the story and discarded the bits that didn't work, but kept the bits that hadn't been debunked at that point in time. And it's only as bits were debunked that he started to change the story a little bit, but never enough to make it sound like he was doing an about face until this point. And I wonder if they picked up on this. So I know this has been a somewhat long-winded one, but I did want to go through the progression of this story that Chris was sharing, because he stuck with it as long as he could, this notion of Stephan going down there to access the storage unit. And I actually hadn't realised until I was preparing for this video that it was Chris who introduced the notion of the storage unit in the first place. And then even while he was talking about the storage unit, he was doing his best to establish the fact that there's no way known Stephan could have possibly gotten into the house. All those coincidental things, of course, which mean that there was no digital evidence. The keypad was disabled, the cameras removed, so they wouldn't have been able to check to see if Stephan was in the house. But that's okay, you don't need to check because there's no way he could have possibly gotten into the house at all. But, oh, gee, wow, this hard drive, he was on it just before he left to go visit Jen and Maddie. But when I handed the tower over, the hard drive was gone. And then he still tries to go with the hard drive being hidden in the storage unit. His whole narrative starts to fall apart. And it really falls apart when they point out that the hard drive that they gave him that he claimed was hidden in the storage unit wasn't the hard drive from Stephan's computer. So he does a complete backflip. And instead of still admitting, even though he has, without realising it, admitted that Stephan's been in the house because he said that the hard drive was there when Stephan left to go to Orlando or Kissimmee, and then it was gone when he handed the computer over. But instead of that, he still has to maintain that Stephan couldn't possibly have gotten into the house. So in the same interview where he has tried to introduce the ideas of him going there to put this in the storage unit, yada yada, all this stuff, don't know why he went down there, he does this complete about face and says, he told me he went down there to get access to his guns to unalive himself. When someone is telling me something, I'm having a conversation with someone, and I get to the end of the conversation and they do a complete about face and tell me something that is entirely different from what they've said at the beginning of that conversation, I'm going to question that. And I find it interesting that detectives just let it lie. I guess they've got no interest in Chris and Deb. If they did help Stephan, then anything that would show that they helped Stephan would show that they helped him prior to him being arrested, and it could be easily argued that he had lied to them and told them a story that did not actually match with what had occurred. We had, in one of the videos I looked at recently, they referred to believing that it was some sort of traffic situation with Maddie and that that's what Stephan had told them. So is it possible that they were being quite honest there and that they thought they were helping stop Stephan from getting into trouble for something that he possibly wasn't involved in, in their opinion. I don't know. Now, I hope I'm not sounding too confusing with all this, but to me, it's just a huge red flag when you see the subtle changes that occur throughout in terms of their narrative, just tweaking it here and there, the over-explaining everything, particularly in relation to the storage unit, the attempts to manipulate the listener to have them draw their own conclusions based on notions that are being given. So rather than, like I said, rather than like Stephan come out with an outright lie, they come out with things that you're supposed to connect the dots and come to a conclusion. And if you come to that conclusion, well, I didn't lie, you came to that conclusion on your own. And then to have this complete about face at the end, when basically all his other stories have been debunked, and to suddenly introduce a new story at the last minute. I'm just not convinced about the honesty of these conversations that Chris and Deb have had with law enforcement. And I've got so many questions still. So on that very, very long note, thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts, because I'm really curious to know what other people think. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.